Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of Sauce at the Scary. Derek, Zoo, Jeff right here with you. Jeff, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm thankful for your pick of this movie, man. I have enjoyed the rewatch and digging into the movie and excited to talk to you about it.
Awesome. Yeah, man, me too. For those of you that don't know, we're going to be talking about The Crow from 1994 that just celebrated its 25th anniversary. And you know how much we love anniversaries and stuff here on the show. So we thought it would be apt to talk about this one. Before we do, though, man, you had a little brush with greatness last night.
Yeah, a $10 per picture brush with greatness. Yeah, it was, the Joe Bob Briggs experience, which this is no criticism for me. I had a blast and thought it was well worth every penny I spent on it. But it's surprisingly like visiting an old wrestler's merch table at a show.
Yeah.
It was $10 for a selfie, $10 to have something you brought autographed, or you could buy some of the merch there, and that was built into the cost. I'm like, oh yeah, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat right here, man.
Yeah, man, they're all cronies. All those people from that era.
Well, and more power to them for making money. Again, I'm not begrudging any of it. I just knew you would appreciate the similarities.
Yeah, for sure. Come here, kid. I got a gimmick to sell you.
Yeah, he was selling his gimmick for sure.
Yeah. That's funny.
Now, having said that, this is basically, he would specifically, I think, mentioned last night that he would be frustrated to hear someone describe it this way. But that was a lecture or a presentation. Joe Bob stood behind a lectern and talked and then played clips and displayed images to illustrate his points. It was fascinating. And I've realized that Joe Bob Briggs is just one of these people who's super brilliant. Not just because he knows everything about, drive-in movies and has mastered the subject of Roger Corman, but he's just brilliant across the board. He mentioned last night, we were in Nashville, he got his bachelor's at Vanderbilt in literature. And, Jody Webster, who has been on this podcast often, referenced even more. He was there as well. And he talked about Joe Bob recently addressed Google about satellite arrays. And I actually figured something out with Joe Bob. He used to be part of this televangelist watchdog group called the Trinity Foundation. And I met his work through them before I met him on Turner with Monster Vision. I mean, just think about how broad the profile of work is that I just described. And last night he talked about the subject was how rednecks saved Hollywood. And he began with Cumberland Presbyterianism and its roots in John Knox's reforms in Scotland, and then just traced it down to modern day Hollywood. And I'm just telling you, it was fascinating. I'm paid to talk to people by two different institutions. I go listen to people talk a lot. I'll pay to go listen to someone talk. It was one of the most captivating, information-rich, entertaining talks I have ever been to. And Joe Bob fits into the category of what we mentioned with Zac Efron. I think just intellectually, some guys get extra, and he definitely got extra.
Wow. I got to be honest with you, man. I never would have expected that. Not to sell Joe Bob short, but if you would have told me any of that going into that lecture last night, I'd have been like, come on, man.
Oh, yeah. I knew a little bit of that. I knew he was a master of Roger Corman and drive-in movies, right? Mm-hmm. But at one point early on, he had a laser pointer on a map of Scotland, England, and Ireland, moving over into central Pennsylvania, then working southward as the people group from, what we would call Scots-Irish people ended up in central Pennsylvania, and then basically used the Appalachian Highway as the Appalachian Mountains as a highway down into the southern U.S. and then westward. I was fascinated. There's a guy standing in a rhinestone cowboy jacket behind a lectern in a hipster movie theater talking about Scots-Irish history, and I was riveted.
Wow.
Yeah, I think my ticket was $25, and it was some of the best money I've spent in a long time for infotainment, which sounds crazy, but that's exactly what it was.
Wow. Well, that's crazy, man. I'm glad you guys had that opportunity to go to that. That's just not what I expected.
Yeah.
I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect that.
Yeah, me either, really. And I tried to talk my wife into going, and she's like, man, I don't want to watch him, watch a movie and talk about it, because she's watched some of the driving stuff with me. I'm like, hey, that's not what he's doing. She's like, well, there's no lecture he's going to give that's going to be in my wheelhouse the way it is in yours. So she didn't go. And I came back, and today while we were getting ready, I was unloading this stuff on her. She's like, I cannot believe that I missed that. I so badly want to go.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not paid by Joe Bob. We have no formal relationship, but if he comes to your area or your driving radius and he's speaking, last night convinced me it's well worth to go hear. If he wants to talk about, the art in Dr. Seuss novels, go hear him. But the talk specifically how Redneck Saved Hollywood was absolutely fascinating. So anyway, I'm with you. I wouldn't have expected this. I probably had a higher anticipation index than you did, but nonetheless, I was absolutely blown away.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. Again, I'm really glad that you guys had the opportunity to go see that. I'm a little jealous that I wasn't able to be there.
Well, in hindsight, man, the reason Jody and I went to this is that we both kicked around long and hard going to see him in Chattanooga when he was there for the film fest.
Oh, yeah.
And decided against it. And I thought, man, really the best world would have been for me, Jody, and Derek to end up in Chattanooga watching him, with your compatriots up there.
Yeah.
And my love for that city. But anyway, yeah, I wish I could go back. I wish I could go back with you. I wish I could go back with my wife. Again, I'm gushing, but I really, if you, listener, if you go attend one of these Joe Bob infotainment events and you're not completely happy you spent your money that way, let me know and I will send you an autographed copy of the podcast.
There you go.
What an offer, right?
That is. I mean, that's well over the $25 price range.
For sure. That's how much we love people. We give away our gimmicks.
Yeah. You don't have to. You come up to our table, you're going to get a signed 8x10. You don't even have to buy anything.
Yeah. At least definitely a free selfie. But anyway,
yeah.
So man, complete and total success. The Belcourt Theater in Nashville is a super cool theater. I was looking at their marquee. They're not nothing against this. They're not playing Endgame and A Dog's Journey. They've got really interesting films that aren't getting wide release. And bringing in Joe Bob for an event like this just kind of ratchets up their cool factor.
Sure.
So thanks to the Belcourt Theater just outside of Vanderbilt, and thanks to Joe Bob for a great evening. I bought a $30 T-shirt so I could have a T-shirt and take a picture with Joe Bob, and I'm very happy I did so.
Yeah. Was it a Roman Reigns T-shirt?
No, man, he didn't sell any. If he did, I would have bought two. Yeah. But he just did.
Could you imagine that? Joe Bob Briggs. Joe Bob Briggs is selling other people's gimmicks.
I mean, there's a world where Joe Bob Briggs worked for a time as like a Smoky Mountain Wrestling manager.
Dude, you could interchange Joe Bob Briggs and Action Mike Jackson, and they're one and the same.
I want to, if we ever develop Avengers technology like we see in Endgame, I'm going to go to the fork where Joe Bob worked for Jim Crockett for a while.
It had to have happened.
For sure. And man, it's just crazy. I didn't realize he had Nashville ties. I knew he was from Texas. So he's like, yeah, when I was in school at Vanderbilt here. And, I don't know what the national perspective on Vanderbilt is, but Vanderbilt is pretty much the most prestigious school in Tennessee, it or Sewanee, but Vanderbilt has a higher profile. And, you find that out, and he starts talking about his Nashville cred, about, he went and heard David Allan Coe perform Take This Job and Shove It the day after he wrote the song at the Exit Inn or whatever. I mean, it's just, it was a gift that kept on giving. Again, I'm going to stop gushing, but seriously, one of the happiest decisions I've made in a long time.
Well, good, man. Sounds like he just cheap popped all over the place last night, so that's good.
Yeah, I spent the whole time laughing. Great callbacks, like Joe Bob really does know what he's doing as a performer, and I couldn't have been more impressed.
Well, good, man. I'm happy. So there you go, listener. You have the Jeff Wright endorsement to go see Jim Roy Haley anywhere that he might be if he's in your area. So don't miss out on that. For sure. Cool, man.
And I'll go back. If I signed up for his mailing list, I will go back the first chance I get.
All right. Well, hey, man, keep me updated.
Okay.
If we can go, I'd love to.
Yeah, I would very much love to do that with you, to come out and talk about it all. Because, I mean, this wasn't particularly, he couldn't get away from referencing like I Spit on Your Grave or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but this wasn't even like horror specific. I can't imagine what it'd be like if it was horror specific. I think I would stay there for 8 hours if he wanted to keep talking.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I told him when I shook his hand to get that selfie that I live in this little town that has a functioning drive-in, and you and I have kicked around the idea of renting that thing and doing like a live podcast. Yeah. We rent it out, bring in Joe Bob. People come from miles around, and we do a live podcast with Joe Bob. I got dreams in my head, Derek Zoo.
Yeah. Did he commit to that or anything?
I didn't pitch it, but I asked the lady working his table how to be in contact. And so there was like a wrestling event. They had an email sign up sheet, and she said, get on this list and reply to it, and we'll follow up with you. So I'm going to reach out. We'll see. I don't know that anything will come of it, but it's a shame that this guy, he said, oh yeah, I definitely know where Cookeville is, when I told him where I was from. And I said, well, right outside of it, there's a functioning drive-in. And anyway, I'd like to move. I don't know if you could do it, but I'd love to move forward on that.
Yeah, man, we should really kick that around. Like, we should really make that happen.
Yeah, I'm assuming he would have a high booking cost, but I really think people would drive from all around to come hear him. So I think we could recoup the money pretty easy, and it would be a blast.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. Huh.
I'll quit talking about Joe Bob now, but strong endorsement from Jeff Wright.
There you go. So go check him out if he's in your area. Does he have a website or anything, Jeff?
I have no idea, actually. I guess I'm just going to wait on that first new newsletter, and if it doesn't show up in the next couple of weeks, I'll go track that stuff down.
Okay. Well, we'll be on the lookout to see. Sorry, I'm trying to look to see. JoeBobBriggs.net is his official website.
Okay.
And you can. It looks like he's got a tour calendar there as well, so you can check it out. See if he's in your area.
Sweet.
Cool. All right, man. Well, hey, I feel like since we're talking about a horror / comic book movie, which is apt because Brightburn came out today, which I think is going to lean more horror than it is comic book. But since we're in that genre right now, I feel like we'd be remiss to not talk about the Avengers. You know, the Avengers came out about a month ago, and you and I have had a few conversations off air about it, but we really haven't been able to give our reviews or our opinions on the air. And I know that there's some of you that aren't the biggest comic book fans. For those of you that aren't, watch Scream 3 for the next 10 minutes and then come back and listen to the podcast.
Well, yeah, let's definitely talk about it. And I will put timestamps for the review in the show notes. So, listener, if you've made it this far and like, I don't want to hear him talk about Endgame, just check your show notes real quick. There should be a clickable link to jump ahead to our review of The Crow. So, yeah, man, let's do that.
All right, dude. Pop in. What's up? Talk to me.
Well, I guess the place to start is I've seen it 4 times so far. How many times have you seen it?
I am right there with you.
Okay. So it's a movie that rewards multiple rewatches. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is just broad strokes to start the conversation with. It's a really high quality movie. It's not a perfect movie, but the thing I needed it to do most, which is 1, be a Steve and Tony movie.
Yeah.
And then number 2, give me a satisfying conclusion to their stories. I thought it knocked out of the park. Now, again, not a perfect movie. I think it can be nitpicked, and you know, it's probably like, I don't know, it's definitely not the best Marvel movie, but it's top 5, top 3. You know, I'm not trying to sing the praises as highly as I did for Joe Bob, I guess, but I'm not a complete rose-colored glasses fanboy about it. But again, the thing I needed most from it, it delivered in spades.
So you don't think it's the best Marvel movie?
No, I don't have major criticisms for it. Other than just a little continuity stuff, which would be, you know, it's hard to keep continuity over 20 films. And Kevin Feige is to be applauded for having done so well. But I just think Black Panther and Winter Soldier, those are the 2 most awesome movies in my mind from Marvel.
Okay.
And they were super tight. There's no real weak points or letdowns, in my opinion, in those. Both of those are pretty much perfect movies in my mind. Even, I'm saying that beyond just the superhero genre.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I'm going to say those 2 are definitely better.
Okay.
But, you know, from 3 down to 5, I could be persuaded.
Yeah.
And so those are my general thoughts. I'd love to hear you react to it or just lay yours out.
Oh, man. I think I've told you this. I think this movie has replaced The Dark Knight as my favorite movie.
Yeah, that's high praise, my friend.
And after after watching it as many times as I have, and knowing the beats and knowing what's coming and everything, it's still like I can't wait to go back and watch it again. If we didn't have such a great string of movies coming out over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I probably would just go back and watch it more.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, I'm going to try to watch it one more time before it leaves theaters.
That's a solid plan. So tell me favorite stuff. I mentioned Tony, and I know you're even a bigger fan than I am of RDJ. Maybe 3 things you like the best about Endgame.
As masochistic as this may sound, I love the whole Tony Stark arc in this movie.
No pun intended, right? Arc
right.
Character. Yeah.
Right. From, Captain Marvel rescuing them at the, in the beginning of the movie to, him having his kid with Pepper and their whole dynamic and how adorable, she was with him, and, the time travel stuff, that scene where he says the S word and she repeats it. I know, like, that's probably the wrong kind of humor, but I still think it's adorable. I don't recommend it to any parent, but I still think it's funny.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, I think I've gone on record as saying that, like, Batman was always my favorite superhero, like my favorite comic book superhero. But I think in the like movie medium, I think Iron Man's got to be it.
Yeah. And
to see him, I have not watched that movie without ugly crying when it's time for him to do what he has to do. So that was really fun. I really enjoy the Steve Rogers story. Like you said, that fight between the two of them is fantastic and has such great callbacks to earlier stuff. And I think it's one of the highlights of the movie. And then, of course, On Your Left.
Yeah.
That's, where we get to see all these superheroes come back and, fight again. Like, it's just, and it could just be that I've watched it recently and, my emotions are still pretty high because this is the culmination of the last, 11 years of watching these movies. But it's going to be hard to beat that one. I agree with you. It's not a perfect movie. But it's darn, in my opinion, it's darn close.
Sure. You talked about ugly crying. Interestingly, in a way, I guess I should have expected, but watching it opening night, it's the closest I've ever been to watching a movie as a live sporting event.
Yeah.
And, should we Wahlberg this?
Probably.
Okay. So, look, I'm going to talk.
Just in case.
Yeah, so just heads up, spoiler time. Mark, if you want to come on in.
What? No.
Spoiler alert. When I saw Tony give himself to save the world, I was, I figured something like this was on the table, but I was really stunned by it. And it really didn't get dusty in my seat till we realized, the family's watching his last video before, conducting his funeral or whatever. But then on subsequent rewatches, I get choked up earlier and earlier. It was him saying, "I'm Iron Man," and snapping, and then, Pepper coming to him as he lays dying. Then, Peter hugging him when they're first reunited.
Yeah.
The "I love you 3000" scene with the daughter becomes much more poignant. And that's not, I'm not a super sensitive male in touch with my emotions, but I think that movie rose above 4-panel comic book stuff into a really impressive drama. And I say that as a comic book fan. That's not, I'm not saying that comic book movies are some kind of garbage or second tier entertainment. I just feel like this movie went even beyond what I already liked about comic books.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing about it. Like, you and I have talked about this before. I think when we reviewed Venom, we talked about how Marvel has really stepped their game up and how people don't want to handle the B movie comic book movie anymore. Mm-hmm. We think that it's got to have all this gravitas and emotion and, blah, 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 blah. But when you stop and think about it, we sat through some crap in the 80s and early 90s. And even in the early 2000s, we went through some crap when it came to superhero movies.
And superhero movies that Kevin Feige was ostensibly in control of. I've been showing my kids the first 2 Fantastic Four movies because they watched Endgame with me, and I was like, it'll be fun to watch them realize Chris Evans is in here as the Human Torch. Right. And, we watched it, and I was just surprised to see Kevin Feige listed as an executive producer. And I thought, wait a minute, did you not have your fastball, or what's going on here?
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, we sat through some crap, and I think to whatever degree he had control. I know Fox had heavy hands in those series of movies, but I also think we hung with those guys while they were learning how to do movies. Yeah. And Iron Man came along, and they were like, "Oh, this is it."
Yeah, and you had such a great. I could gush over Robert Downey Jr. every day, all day. But you have one of the greatest actors of the last generation playing, your lead guy. You've got a director who has always. I've always loved Jon Favreau's stuff, and he doesn't disappoint in that first movie, and you just see oh, this is how it's going to be. And the crazy part about that is that movie came out the same year The Dark Knight came out, and there was a lot of people that were like, The Dark Knight's a great movie, but Iron Man was amazing. Mm-hmm. At the end of the year, I remember a lot of best of lists and stuff were saying The Dark Knight #2, Iron Man #1, and it's hard to argue with that. I still think Iron Man might be my favorite Marvel movie.
Well, that gets to what you said about Jon Favreau. He is the unsung hero here, because Marvel was kind of floundering in their partnership projects and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And that guy came along and showed them how to make a very comic faithful, entertaining, compelling movie with rich characters. And again, I think there have been a lot of people who have taken that and ran with it. I'm going to say that the two movies I already mentioned, Winter Soldier and Black Panther, are better, but they don't get there apart from Favreau coming in to lay out the map, basically. I don't want to say the groundwork, but he just said, hey, look, here's how you do it. And then they went and played with the themes. And I hope that history looks kindly on him as a director for that, because this, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is taking over Hollywood. And again, I think he is literally the linchpin.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, they just... Sorry, I'm trying to... I didn't know that Kevin Feige was in charge of those early 2000 Marvel movies. That's interesting.
I didn't until I saw it on the credits.
Yeah. Maybe he saw, maybe he didn't have his hand in a lot with that, and he saw how these characters were being, for the lack of a better word, abused. Mm-hmm. And he went to whomever and said, we've got to open our own studio. We have to have control of these characters. We need to be able to do these movies the right way. And so maybe... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say I wouldn't be surprised, because that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, maybe we had to endure the suck to get what we've gotten. And if that's the case, I'm down for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a price well worth the cost. It was a product well worth the cost, and I'd be happy to pay it with my Cinemac dollars all over again.
Yeah. Absolutely, man.
The last thing I've got on that is that, again, I needed it to be a Tony and Steve movie. I know that the franchise is being handed off to Spider-Man and Black Panther and Captain Marvel. That's cool. But the axis of this first phase, which I guess Feige has said wraps up with the next Spider-Man movie, not Endgame. So it's an interesting thing that I'm interested in seeing how it plays out. But the axis is, in the first Avengers, Steve and Tony fighting about their differences, right? So Iron Man accuses Steve of being a science experiment. Everything special about you came out of a bottle. Mm-hmm. And Steve looks back and says, cool, you got the suit, you got the invention stuff, but you're not the kind of guy to make the sacrifice play. And then by the time we get to Endgame, we know Steve is worthy. Of course, we knew some of this from the first Avenger, but when he picks up Mjolnir, we realize, yep, Steve's worthy. It's not what's in the super soldier serum. It's what he was before that makes him unique. And Tony makes the sacrifice play. And I love Tolkien. I think of him as an incredible storyteller and big picture mapping stuff. We're living in the age. I've never, watched Game of Thrones, but people really love George R.R. Martin as a storyteller. We've seen things like Breaking Bad play out. I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Phase 1 or whatever, is as impressive a long con storytelling arc around these two characters as I've ever seen. And I read a lot of literature.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree more with that. And, you know, I don't know if I was talking to you about this or who I was talking to. I mean, I've said this to several people, but I was really happy that they focused on the original six in this movie.
Yeah, me too.
And told their story, because it had been real easy to try and incorporate the next generation, you know, the Black Panther, Spider-Man, Captain Marvel, especially Captain Marvel, man.
Sure.
You know, Captain Marvel has been for the last year touted as like the savior of the, you know, of the MCU, right? Like she's going to come in, she's going to rock Thanos, and you know, it's game over. And so to have her not be in this movie as much as she was, or as little as she was, I thought at first I felt a little cheated, because I wanted a Carol Nick Fury reunion in the movie.
Sure.
But the more that I thought about it, the more I was like, no, that was the right move to make, because you've got more time to spend with those characters. You know, Samuel L. Jackson is immortal, and he's never going to die, and so he's going to be in all these movies from now until the end of time. So you have those opportunities to see that in Captain Marvel too, right?
Sure.
So, you know, you don't have to give the goods away for everything in this movie. So it was just, again, it was just nice to see them stick with the original six, and to see them pay off arguably the top two most popular characters, you know, of the last 11 years. The way that they did was very apt. And you know, it's a movie that I can't, like I said, I can't wait to go see it again. I wish I had time to go see it today. I'd go watch it, but I look forward to seeing it again, and I can't wait to own it. I'll probably watch it every day for a month straight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'll be a appointment viewing situation for the right family.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I can't give the movie enough high praise. Real quick, I mean, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't do this. What are your nitpicks?
There's some continuity stuff. You know, like I wonder what it means, and I just give it to the Russos. They could fix this or, you know, explain it. But like the idea that Steve went back and lived through an alternate timeline with Peggy, but then, you know, the Russos have come out and said that Peggy's kids are his. So how does that work? Also, just wonder how Steve Rogers goes back in time and sets out with his wife, and maybe he didn't do this, but how does he set out all the stuff that's happening in the world in those eras, right? We've got national, if not wars, conflicts like Korea and Vietnam, and in the comics, all the Hydra stuff is developing there too, we would assume. And like, does he just ride it out in a suburban home dancing the night away? I'm okay. Yeah. You know, he's put his time in. If it's retirement, I don't think he's required, but it just seems like his moral compass wouldn't let that happen.
Right.
It's more about, you know, just Steve's arc. And I would like to have seen a version where Steve becomes basically Fury. And I guess maybe we'll get that, although I think Chris Evans has said he's largely done. I also, as a comic book nerd, I'm really excited about Sam getting the shield, but I would have liked a time where Bucky had it for a little while, and then let it end up with Sam. And then, you know, the deal with Tony, I get why they tell the story the way they did. But did you read that there's a deleted scene where Tony snaps everything back to 5 years ago, basically just undoes what Thanos did, and then he meets Morgan in the Soul Stone the way that Thanos met young Gamora?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think I told you about that.
Okay, well then, okay, thank you for telling me about that. I still don't know if I wouldn't prefer that, because my mind goes to like all these scenarios. You know, what about the mom who had, you know, she was pregnant and the fetus got snapped out of existence. She lives for 5 years and wakes up one day and she's 6 months pregnant.
Yeah.
Or the guy whose wife disappeared, or vice versa. They wait, you know, several years, get remarried, and all of a sudden their spouse is back. You know, like there's all these dilemmas, and I don't know. What we know of Tony Stark by the end of Endgame makes me think that he might have just played the odds on let's reset everything and take the hit that it is to me personally. I'm not saying that would be better. I just wonder if I wouldn't prefer it.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of questions that come out of it, which maybe is a strength of the movie, actually, that it leaves you asking good questions. But the fact that they're there, I didn't have those with Winter Soldier and Black Panther. Like, I just thought every string was tied up by the time those movies were over, which may not be what everybody prefers. I don't always prefer it. I like lingering questions sometimes, but nonetheless, those would be my small quibbles.
I got you. Okay. That's fair, and I think those are sound questions. Sometimes we tend to nitpick things, and sometimes you tend to nitpick things, and you're like, okay, come on, man, you don't need to nitpick that. But I think all that stuff that you just said are apps, or good reasons to say that this movie's not perfect. But
yeah, and here's the thing: I don't feel like I'm nitpicking, because if there was never another Marvel movie made, I would be entirely satisfied with what they have accomplished. So
yeah.
I mean, you are kind of criticizing a couple brushstrokes on the Mona Lisa. I know that's hyperbole, but in terms of pop culture cinema, it doesn't get much better.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Scale of 1 to 10, what would you give it?
Yeah, I'm just going to give it a 10.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there are shades of 10s, and that's all that's the only way I'm going to indicate that I think it's just slightly under perfect. But, I mean, what can you really complain about? There might be questions or whatnot, but there's nothing that's a weakness. So,
right.
You?
Yeah, I agree. Same thing, man. 10 all the way around. I love this movie 3000.
I've never went to check this out, but I saw it reported a couple different places that the total runtime of the Marvel Cinematic Universe up to that point was 3,000 minutes.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, it's a clever meme on Facebook right now, but I haven't went back and checked it myself.
Yeah, whatever the truthfulness turns out to be, it's a poignant way to think about this series, and man, I'm so happy that we got to have this. I mean, we've mentioned it 100 times on here, but if you'd have told me in middle school that I would ever see one movie the quality of what we've gotten from Marvel Cinematic, I would have been blown away. And to see the heights we actually did get in just the first phase is, I don't know, it just feels really feels like a rich gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've set up some really great characters for the next stage, and I'm excited to see where that takes us. But I'll be honest with you, man, I don't know if I'll ever be as hyped for those movies as I was for this round.
Absolutely.
But glad I got to live through it, and glad I got to be a part of it. And yeah, like I said, man, I can't wait to own that movie, and I may buy it 3 or 4 different times just to make sure that I've got it. All right, well, let's get to the main event.
Yeah, baby.
Let's go back in our Wayback Machine to May 13th, 1994, and let's talk about The Crow.
All right, so let me just remind us all what era we're in here, because 1994 seems, I guess, in some ways closer and further away. In 94, Lisa Marie Presley married Michael Jackson. Kurt Cobain committed suicide. I just cherry-picked some of the most, if not the best movies of the era, the ones that stood out to my mind. So we got Pulp Fiction that year. We got The Shawshank Redemption and Forrest Gump. We got The Lion King, and we got Dumb and Dumber. So that's where the world was.
One of these things is not like the other.
Well, I mean, that's all, there's a lot of world-changing stuff that happens there. So Friends debuted in 94. The original PlayStation debuted in 94.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and both Amazon and Yahoo were founded in 94.
Okay.
And then just the other thing, it didn't really change the world, but it sure felt pretty earth-rattling at the time. We watched O.J. Simpson and Al Cowlings go on a long drive through Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So that's the world into which The Crow stepped. I mean, The Crow was before some of that and after some of it, but that's where we're at when we're thinking about this film.
Hey, man, can I tell you the top 10 songs from Billboard Magazine's Top 100 in 1994?
Yeah, lay it on me.
All right. Number 10, Don't Turn Around, Ace of Base.
Oh, yeah, man. Ace of Base holds up.
Yeah. Number 9, All That She Wants, Ace of Base.
Okay, man. Yeah.
Yeah. Number 8, All for Love, Bryan Adams, Rod Stewart, and Sting.
Yeah. Colder.
Yeah. Breathe Again by Tony Braxton, number 7.
Yeah.
Number 6, Stay, I Missed You by Lisa Loeb and 9 Stories.
I think this is the year that Left Eye Lisa from TLC got arrested for burning down Andre Rison's house as well, since you mentioned that, Lisa.
It was either 94 or 98.
Okay.
Yeah, I forget. Number 5, Hero by Mariah Carey.
Yeah.
Number 4, The Power of Love by Celine Dion. And check this out, man. The top 3. These are a product of their time. Number 3, I'll Make Love to You, Boyz II Men. Number 2, I Swear, All for One. And can you want to take a guess as to what the number 1 song was in 1994?
Man, I should know. I mean, it's not anything grunge, right? Because I think
that had pretty much passed us by this point.
Okay, man. I guess I don't have a guess, man. You have to lay it on me.
I Saw the Sign.
Ace of Base, man.
Ace of Base.
They own 94, dude.
Yeah, they did, man. I remember going to the skating rink, and that's all they would play is Ace of Base, and I'd be like, for goodness sakes, play something else.
Yeah. Dude, those Ace of Base songs, I would still be excited to hear come up on my, Pandora or whatever streaming station I'm listening to.
Oh, yeah, man. You know what? I listened to it not too long ago. I put together a 90s playlist, and I put all that Ace of Base stuff on there.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, it was good stuff.
And speaking of soundtracks, did you pay attention to the soundtrack of this film much?
Yeah, a little bit. Corgan did it, right?
Well, I mean, there's a ton of guys on it, or a ton of bands from that era. So like Rage Against the Machine's on there. I think Trent Reznor covered a Joy Division song on it. I mean, it's just a time capsule. Like, it's the music I was listening to. Of course, I was also listening to like Tupac, but it was that kind of alternative, emotional, kind of whiny, but nonetheless music. And then, gangsta rap, that defines that year for me musically, even though Ace of Base certainly was on my radar. And, just hearing the songs in this film, it's a quick snap back to times you're more nostalgic for, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I was wrong on that. For some reason, I thought that Billy Corgan... Isn't there a movie that the Smashing Pumpkins did like the entire soundtrack to?
Oh, I'm sure. And if he's not on this soundtrack, it's the great oversight. Like, I have to believe their track got left on the floor, or he was feeling especially prima donna-y, because he's exactly his art is the kind of stuff that showed up on this soundtrack 100%.
Yeah, Smashing Pumpkins is the only band on here that I would think should be on here. The Cure, Stone Temple Pilots, Nine Inch Nails, Rage Against the Machine, Rollins Band, Pantera.
I mean, that is the most 90s thing ever. You can take away your 90s playlist and just play the soundtrack, and you're in the 90s, Yeah. That's wild.
Throw Kiss from a Rose and I Believe I Can Fly on there, and you pretty much got all the great movie songs of the 90s.
Which, I mean, I know a lot of our listeners, this is going to be too old for, but I'm assuming for a lot of the listeners also, this is the same kind of nostalgia bump that you get when you watch a movie like this. It harkens back to, if not childhood, early adulthood, and in a fun way, I guess.
Yeah, faux show.
Well, hey, speaking of The Crow, I was talking to Jody about this while we stood in line to pay for Joe Bob's Gimmicks last night. I realized that there are... Well, it's a collection of films and The Crow. They're basically two cinematic creations that I have bought in every generation of tech that they were released on. And that's Star Wars. I've had Star Wars from VHS to Blu-ray. I don't think they've released a 4K edition yet, but I'll buy it.
Yeah.
And I have had The Crow from Blu-ray to whatever the last edition is. I don't think they belong in the same category, but it says something about me personally in the way that this film grabbed my attention. It's hung with me.
Yeah, so this movie obviously was on my radar from the beginning. Now, I wasn't into the Crow comic, so I didn't know much about it. But, the biggest thing about this was the Brandon Lee tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to figure, trying to see that, see what they did or how they worked around it. And, even at 8 or 9, I was still pretty like, I got to see this movie because I need to know how they work around, this guy passing away through the movie and stuff. And, going back and rewatching this, man, Brandon Lee should have been one of the biggest stars. Like, he should have been one of the biggest movie stars in the world.
I was going to ask you about that. I kind of got things chopped up here under headings, and the one that leads with Brandon is if you think that he is as good as we feel like he was, or if he got the died too young bump. And so you're definitely in the he was as good as we're all kind of looking back concluding that he was.
Yeah, I think so, man. I don't know if like he's like as technical or as like Robert Downey Jr., or stuff like that. But when he comes on the screen, that's where your focus goes.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in the 90s, that's what made a movie star.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you didn't have to be the world's greatest actor. You just needed to be someone who captivated an audience. And I could easily see, and this may be sacrilege and I'll take the hits, but I could easily see, 9 years from the time this movie comes out, Brandon Lee being a sun-kissed pirate, Captain Jack Sparrow on Pirates of the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Like he just has that same kind of presence about him. And, so I don't know if like his acting chops are as good as, you would think of like Heath Ledger or Downey or Christian Bale or Daniel Day-Lewis or anything like that. But he always catches your eye. He's always, obviously he's the main character in this. He's the Crow, so you're always looking for him. But, this movie lives or dies, no pun intended, with him. Yeah. And when he's not on the screen, you're waiting for him to come back on the screen.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you. I watched this probably with my most critical eye this time because I knew I was reviewing it and wanted to give it a serious effort. Most of the time before, I've just watched it for pleasure. The scene in Albrecht's apartment where he finds out what happened to Shelley after he died, and I just think that's incredible acting, basically. And, when at the end, Albrecht asks him, are you going to jump out the window? And he says, I think I'll use the front door. Mm-hmm. I thought that was incredibly well delivered. Like, we're supposed to feel very sorry for him, and you do. But the thing about this movie is it's a revenge movie, and every character is kind of two-dimensional because you need to hate them or you need to root for them, and they don't have a lot of time to give you nuance,
Yeah.
But that scene in the apartment with Albrecht is where I most connect with Eric Draven as a guy who's been wronged, and for all the supernatural stuff he's caught up in and the vengeance quest he's on, he's still a dude who loved a woman and had those good things taken from him too quickly. I don't know what it is about the scene itself capturing that for me, but like that is a definitive line delivery and scene in that movie for me.
Yeah.
And I think it says something about what he could attain to as an actor. So I'm with you. Like, he probably never rose to the heights of a Heath Ledger or some of the other, maybe even a River Phoenix. But considering how young his career was, I definitely think we've got reason to think he would get there.
Yeah, I agree.
So you said you didn't know much about the comic. I didn't know independent comics existed in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
But I've since learned about James O'Barr, who created this. And do you know much about his story?
I don't.
So basically, the Crow is born out of his own tragedy. His fiance was killed by a drunk driver when he was 18.
Oh, my goodness.
And he ended up going to the military in 78 and was trying to work through this stuff and decided, hey, I'll put it on paper. And so he started creating the Crow, worked on it till like 81, but he said it didn't help him. Like he just got darker and darker. In the comic book, I've went back and read since then. And like, this is a pretty dark movie, but the deaths are much more violent in the comic book. And so anyway, he said that it kind of took him to a darker place, and he didn't get catharsis until he saw the film as a finished production. But anyway, he wrote this thing, finished in 81. Nobody wanted it. It wasn't published till 89, but it went on to become the best-selling independent comic of all time.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, that's true as of like 5 years ago. I haven't looked since then, but I think I would know. Maybe I wouldn't, but I think I would know if that had been broken. So it's pretty impressive material. And the comic is a little bit, it looks a little rudimentary by today's standards, but it's a really great read. I mean, it holds up, man.
Do you think that it was because, I mean, was that before the movie came out or since the movie came out that it's become that?
The best-selling?
Yeah.
Since then, it sold like crazy before, but of course the movie, what happened with Brandon Lee, all that's going to, and also culture, like there are people who are listening to this podcast who are going to scream at me when I say this, but I can only talk about it from my lived experience. What would have been described in our high school as first goth and then emo, that showed up in culture, maybe in part because of The Crow, but certainly The Crow, if it wasn't driving it, it was a piece of pop culture that people in that community really latched onto. And so there's a lot of stuff happening that I think that accounts for the sales, but nonetheless, I think it speaks to the inherent value of the story before it becomes a movie and all that too. Speaking of it as a revenge movie, I'm just going to run through the deaths in this movie, and you tell me which one your favorite is.
Okay.
One of them's not a death, but it's certainly an act of vengeance. So 1010, he's the first guy that Eric encounters after his resurrection. Eric uses his own knives to torture and kill the criminal, and then he later draws that emblem in blood from Tintin's body, or from Tintin's blood. Mm-hmm. Next up is Gideon, the pawn shop owner, who doesn't die, but is burned in the explosion of his shop. A fun boy dies with needles in his chest. T-Bird is strapped into a car that's about to blow up and is driven into the river by whatever Eric rigged up to lock in the steering wheel. And then lastly, you've got Top Dollar, who Eric kills by giving him all of Shelley's pain. As a revenge movie, what's your favorite act of revenge here?
I mean, this probably seems like the cop-out answer, but man, Top Dollar for me is the most cathartic. Mm-hmm. And going back and rewatching this movie, and I probably haven't watched this movie in about a year. I think I picked it up. I think you and I had talked about doing this movie last year, reviewing this movie last year, because I'd watched it, and I had just forgotten how good it was.
Yeah. But
watching him finally serve justice to Top Dollar, man, it's just really, really nice.
Sure. It's the most surprisingly just death in the movie. Like, you knew that Top Dollar had to die.
Yeah.
But it just struck me. I mean, and of course, this is a superhero who's created with specific powers to serve the narrative aims that the storyteller wants to tell, but that he has these empathy powers. It was just like, oh, that is the perfect way for this guy to die. And I wish every victimizer in the world had to experience what Top Dollar lived through right then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I wish that's what we could sentence people to in our legal system.
Yes.
Now, having said all that, I'm going to go back to 1010.
Okay.
I think 1010's death and encounter, it kind of sets everything up about this movie. You realize the power that Eric is dealing with. You realize the mission he's on. And you realize that this is not a guy who's going to live by the noble superhero code. Mm-hmm. And the thing I really appreciate about it is, again, it's so important to a revenge movie, but we see 1010 when in the home invasion scene when they are tormenting Shelley in various different ways. He licks the blood off his knife. Mm-hmm. And that Eric takes his instruments away from him and uses them against them is exactly what you want when you see victims rise up against victimizers, right? You want to see them disarmed and have to suffer as they've made others, which is actually better captured in Top Dollar, as you've already said. But there's something about Eric making him eat the blades that he used to taste the blood of his fiancée from, that if I get in my vengeance is necessary mindset, I just found it deeply satisfying.
Yeah.
And they do some of that with the fight between 1010 and him. It's really the only, until the end, where we get a mano-a-mano matchup with the Crow. When Eric is able to dodge the knives but then catch them, and 1010, the guy who acted him out, delivers it, he realizes now that he has been literally disarmed, and what he had used to inflict torment on other people was of no use against this guy. It feels like the world is becoming more just as soon as Eric catches that knife.
Yeah.
I guess again, I told you I had it kind of chunked up here in certain different categories. Before we move on from like scenes, was there anything in this that really grabbed your attention? Like if someone says The Crow, what scene do you think of first?
Honestly, the one where he's pulling the heroin out of that mom's arm.
Yeah, dude, that's the other one I've got listed here. Me too. Like that just stays with you.
Yeah.
And I could, no matter where I'm at, I could repeat that line. Mother is the name for God on the lips of all children. Like when I first heard that, it was like seared into my brain.
Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite quote in the whole movie. And yeah, I mean, I remember I probably watched this when it came out on VHS. I don't think I went to the theater and saw it. So I was probably 9 by that point. Mm-hmm. And just as a 9-year-old kid, this movie blew my mind anyway. But as a 9-year-old kid watching, this guy take this poison out of this person's body was just, you're right. It stays with you.
I know there's CGI in this movie, and I've read online that people, say it doesn't hold up super well. I think this is a case where like my nostalgia just overrides my criticism. Mm-hmm. But that's one of the great special effects that I have seen in the movies that are most important to me. I mean, the Christine scene where the car heals itself is probably my favorite ever. But watching the morphine ooze out of her veins, I just thought, man, that's incredible. This angel of death and vengeance also uses his powers for good in a way that was just visually arresting. It just took the movie up a notch for me, I think.
Yeah. I had wondered if you were going to call me on it or not, because I make fun of Event Horizon's horrible CGI. And this one does have, it's not the best. Obviously it was 1994, and we've come a long way in the last 25 years. But I'm the same way as you, man. I can watch this movie anytime, and just my nostalgia hits, and so I don't care.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, that's probably what separates it from Event Horizon, is the fact that I didn't grow up on that movie.
Sure.
But I grew up on The Crow, and I think it's blasphemy for people to want to. For people to want to try to say anything negative or cruel about the CGI in this one.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, that his wounds heal and all that stuff, fine. I'm not worried about that at all. It looks plenty good enough for me to get to what I really actually like about this movie. And okay, if you can't meet me there, cool. Let's just not talk about it, because I'm perfectly happy.
Yeah.
Did you know that Michael Berryman, who I guess some people are going to think of as the guy from Weird Science, the strange-looking guy from Weird Science, and obviously as a Robert Downey Jr. fan, I know you're probably a fan of that movie too, but yes, our horror community is going to know him as Pluto, the inbred mutant from The Hills Have Eyes.
Okay.
Did you know he was in this movie and all his stuff was cut out?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I found this watching Joe Bob Briggs. I'm just slowly trying to work back through his Shudder stuff, and I'm watching the Thanksgiving movies. Well, he brings Berryman on when they watch The Hills Have Eyes, and he brings up The Crow, and my ears perked up. There's this character in the comics called the Skull Cowboy, who is a more, like, he does the same stuff the Crow does in guiding Eric, but he can talk, and so he tells him explicit stuff. And Berryman played that character, but Proyas cut all those scenes because basically the Skull Cowboy is there to say you can only work on revenge, you can't help the living. So like when he goes and helps Darla, Skull Cowboy is there to be like, you're going to kill yourself if you do that. That'll deactivate your powers. And when he goes to rescue, I can't remember her name. I know Shelly and Darla. What was the little kid's name?
Oh, man. Give me a second.
Well, we'll call her the little kid.
That's fine.
When he goes
Sarah,
thank you. When he goes to rescue Sarah, the Skull Cowboy shows up and says, you're going to be mortal if you go do this, because your powers are given only for revenge. You can't help the living. And I'd like to see Michael Berryman in this, but I think they made the right decision to cut that stuff out, to tie his powers to the Crow rather than the mission.
Yeah.
But all this stuff is available online. You can go find these YouTube clips where what's left of these cut scenes are spliced back in, and they're readily available on YouTube.
Yeah, man, I need to do that, because I think that actually would have been good to keep in.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
It does do more exposition.
Yeah, you kind of have can you call him the conscience for the Crow? I don't know if you call him that or not. Like, he's his Whistler.
Yeah.
Right? Like
yeah.
Blade had Whistler.
Uh-huh.
That would have been the Crow's.
Sure. I mean, I get it. I guess I'm going to stand by better to not have that guy because I think Proyas saw him as redundant. I just think it's easier to tie the powers to the health of the Crow, and it helps you like Eric as a human more because you see that he's still working for good, not just for revenge.
Sure.
But I mean, far be it for me to say Michael Perryman shouldn't be in the movie.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of in the movie, I totally forgot that Tony Todd was in this movie until rewatching it this time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of the acting in this is a pleasant surprise that way.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I mean, I know that the elephant in the room is the death of Brandon Lee. Michael Mass, who plays Fun Boy, I didn't know till I started looking into it now. I say Mass, it's Massee, so it's probably Massey. Mm-hmm. He's the one who pulled the trigger that killed Brandon Lee. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Did you see, like, I don't want to explain it to our listeners if you saw it as well, but did you see how it affected him?
I did, yeah.
So he never saw the movie. He took several years off of acting. He died not too long ago, but in 2005, he told Extra that you just don't ever get over something like that, and that he's lived with guilt over it forever.
Yeah, he passed in 2016 from cancer.
He was like 64, right?
I believe so. Yeah, 60. Yeah, 64.
Man, that just sucks. I had always thought as a kid that Brandon was shot in the confrontation with the gangsters before Devil's Night.
Okay.
And it just made more sense to me that if you have a bunch of guns firing, one of them might be the one that's in error.
Yeah.
And to realize there is one particular guy who pulled the trigger, that's crushing, man. I can't imagine living with that.
Yeah, I couldn't either. And you got to feel for Michael Massey on that because it's just, I mean, there's no words,
Yeah.
It's just it's a really unfortunate, tragic accident. And I mean, I think he took a year off of acting. And for me, I think that would have been it, man.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be hard for that to not be it for your public life. I don't know. I just can't imagine. He should have never been put in the position. It just shouldn't have happened like that, and it did, man. And he had to live with it. Do you want to walk people through how that came to pass that Brandon Lee was shot?
Yeah. So in the scene where Eric finds his fiance being beaten, amongst other things, Massey's character fires what is known as a Smith & Wesson Model 629 Magnum revolver. And in the previous scene, they used the same gun it called for, a dummy cartridge. It had no primer or powder on it. It was to be loaded in the revolver for a close-up scene. Film scenes, they utilize a revolver where the bullets are visible from the front, but they don't necessarily require the gun to actually be fired. The dummy cartridges provide the realistic appearance of actual rounds. Does all that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So instead of purchasing a commercial dummy cartridge, the film's prop crew created their own, my goodness, by pulling the bullets from live rounds, dumping the powder charge, and then reinserting the bullets. However, they unknowingly or unintentionally left the live primer in place at the rear of the cartridge. And then at some point during filming, the revolver was apparently discharged with one of these improperly deactivated cartridges that set off the primer with enough force to drive the bullet partway into the barrel, where it became stuck, which is commonly known as a squib load. And I guess the prop crew just didn't realize it or failed to recognize it, or I'm not real sure.
I've read in other articles that the main prop guy had gone home for the day and like an assistant had been tasked. This is crazy in hindsight, but an assistant had been tasked with handling this, and that's where the screw up happened.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So anyway, this bullet, it got Brandon in the abdomen, and he was rushed to the New Hanover Regional Medical Center in Wilmington, North Carolina. He underwent surgery for 6 hours, and on March 31st, 1993, at 1:03 p.m. Eastern Time, Brandon Lee was pronounced dead. and the shooting was ruled an accident due to negligence. Brandon Lee was 28 years old, Jeff.
Man, yeah, well, it sounds like a baby at this point, you know.
Yeah. You know what's crazy is we already tied something back to wrestling, so I guess it's apt to do it again. 20 years ago yesterday, on May 23rd, 1999, Owen Hart tragically lost his life in an accident that didn't involve bullets, but it was a stunt that went awry.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, one of the things that one of the new podcasts I listen to is a podcast called Real and JR with Conrad Thompson and Jim Ross, and where, you know, JR was sitting there at ringside while Owen fell 78 feet to his death in front of 20,000 people. And one of the things that they spoke about on the podcast this week, I mean, they talked about that pay-per-view, and they talked about the fact that this guy came in saying that he was the one that had been harnessing Sting for the last couple of years.
Sting, obviously, his gimmick being based on the Crow.
Exactly. And come to find out, this guy had never harnessed Sting. He had just been with a company and was somewhat like how you said the main stunt guy went home for the day. Well, that's pretty much what happened in this situation too.
Oh, no.
And there was a quick release mechanism. So anyway, Owen was supposed to rappel down from the rafters to get into the ring, much like Sting would do. To fight the bad guys. Owen was going to rappel down to the ring. There was a quick release mechanism. Owen apparently was trying to readjust his cape and hit it, and then just fell. And I don't know, man. It's just it's weird, the timing. You know, talking about this movie and then that happening yesterday, and the whole reason that happened was because the WWF was trying to incorporate some of the same stuff. You know, I don't know if they were trying to spoof Sting, because Owen Hart's character at the time was called the Blue Blazer, and the Blue Blazer was a comedy character. So I don't know if they were trying to make fun of Sting or what the situation was, but it ultimately led to the loss of a man that was universally loved in the wrestling business. And it's crazy to me that something similar like this happened on the set of The Crow to someone who arguably could have been one of the biggest stars in the world.
Yeah.
Had his, was on the precipice of his career really taking off.
I mean, there's just connections to other deaths in this that are like the worst kind of parallels, like you're talking about with Owen. And again, there's a direct line back into the Crow, right? Because of Sting and replicating that, on WWE's part. On the other side of that, same year, not too much, March, April. So Kurt Cobain kills himself. He's very much part of the community that this movie is drawing on. Most of the companion acts are on the soundtrack. And, just a matter of days. It's not even close to a month. It's like 9 days after Brandon Lee dies, Kurt Cobain's out too. I mean, it just sucks all the way around, man.
Yeah.
I did find this interview that DK Blair did with James O'Barr pretty soon after the movie released. And he asks Barr, how did Brandon's death affect you? And so he says, when Brandon died, I had a very, very hard time. That's obviously. The feelings of guilt and responsibility were enormous. But he goes on to say stuff I didn't realize, and I should have. But the similarities between Eric's death and Brandon's, well, this is James O'Barr's words, it almost lends itself to a supernatural interpretation. So Brandon was killed filming the scene in which Eric is killed. In the film and the book, this occurs right before Eric's wedding. Brandon was set to get married just a few days after the filming of the movie was finished. And he goes on to be like, this is just too close to home, basically, I don't know what else to say about it other than it just sucks. And I hate that this is the way the real world plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nuts. I was listening to that Owen Hart podcast last night, and I was thinking, he wore a mask like he was in a superhero costume. Why don't you make a superhero costume for somebody who is his body type, a stuntman, who is trained to do stuff like this, and have them do that? And then you've got all the pyro and ballyhoo that you can, think to give him the old switcheroo, or even, have like his opponent in the ring and this guy comes down and he's fumbling with his mechanism and he can't get it undone, and then you have Owen come in from behind and attack the guy. Like, there's a million, and obviously it's easy to play, armchair booker now, that 20 years has gone by, but man, there just seems like there's better ways and safer ways to do things like that. And the same thing here. It just feels like these guys should have been taking better care of their actors and their talent. And, if they would have, then, there's a good possibility that we would still have Brandon Lee here today. I mean, he'd be 53 at this point. Which doesn't seem old at all.
Sure.
And it's just tragic, man. It's just really, really tragic.
Well, I know you're not saying that like better a stuntman to die than Owen, but we know Owen was really uncomfortable with what this required of him.
Right.
And somebody who was a professional, who was confident in what he's doing, you've got to assume they would have much better odds of doing it safely. And like you said, if there's a mask involved, what's the big deal,
Yeah.
But sadly, hindsight is what we're working with, because it can't be fixed.
Right. And it's unfortunate, and you just hate to see talented people have their lives cut short, especially for Owen. Owen had 2 years left on his contract, and then he was probably going to retire. And think about this, Jeff. Owen was 34 when he died.
Yeah.
I'm turning 34 this year.
Sure.
Like, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, 100%.
And, he had 2 kids and a beautiful wife, and they've had to grow up without him. And the same thing for Brandon Lee. Brandon Lee was 28 years old and had, I know it's cliche to say that the world was his oyster, but it really was.
Yeah.
And
and his poor fiance, like they're looking to get married.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it like every tragedy. And again, like you said, you hate to see a talented person taken. Every human death is a tragedy. There's this not in a way that makes it more weighty, but there's this other layer of like, he had so much to offer to the rest of the world. But you see this ripple effect catching up. James Barr and Massey, who pulled the trigger, and his fiance, and like it just washes out over people. And it's heartbreaking. There's nothing you can do. These events have already taken place, but it's heartbreaking to kind of have to go back and re-examine it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Well,
I was just going to say, to bring it to 2019, I don't know if you know this or not, but the person who came in and finished The Crow for Brandon Lee was a gentleman by the name of Chad Stahelski.
Okay.
Stahelski, excuse me. And he is the gentleman who directed John Wick 3.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of 2019. Oh, sorry. I don't know why we're stepping on each other lately, but yeah.
It's fine. I think there's a little bit of a lull in
lag
in the connection. Yeah, I'm sorry. But anyway, so Stahelski actually had a little tribute for Brandon Lee on the set of John Wick 3. That's where I was getting at.
Oh, yeah. I wonder if there's any record of this stuff. I'd love to see that. I wonder if like anybody throw that up on YouTube or anything.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm on movieweb.com right now, and there's an article about it. I'll send you the link.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, there has where I was going to take the 2019 reference is that there is talk of a remake, but it has it's languished forever. And we got news last year that Jason Momoa was going to participate, but it looks like everybody has walked away from that thing at this point.
Yeah, it feels like every 3 years there's a new, hey, such and such is going to do The Crow, and it ultimately falls by the wayside. And I'm at the point now where it needs it has to be somebody really good to remake this thing. Otherwise, I don't want it to happen.
Sure. I read that Obar has committed to writing the script, which gives me some hope. I assume he would treat it with respect, but the last director that was attached to it, basically it came to him and said, I'm not going to remake the 94 film. I'm not going to touch that at all. I just want to do a shot-for-shot remake of your comic. And that was when Momoa was attached. And I thought, if you're going to do it, let's try it that way. You know what I mean? Like, somebody owns the rights to this. Obar has had nothing to do with any of the sequels in this franchise. They've all been terrible. Somebody with those rights is going to make another one of these. And if we're going to do it, let's try to stay away from the Brandon Lee film. Let's try to cut a new path as much as possible.
Yeah.
The last thing I've got, and I know we've got to wrap up here, this movie has had a long tail in terms of influence. So we talked about Sting, but I specifically wanted to run back through with you. Have you seen online these people who make comparisons between The Crow and Nolan's Batman films?
No, I haven't.
Well, I'm just going to throw some of the elements at you, and then you can tell me if you think there's anything to this or not, right?
Okay.
Obviously, Eric and Heath Ledger are working from behind painted faces. Mm-hmm. And some people online have noted, I think this is a lesser one, but that Eric's like cold cream makeup or whatever it is fades away the longer the movie goes on. And that with the Joker, his makeup degenerates and gets flakier and whatnot as the movie goes on. Mm-hmm. And they see that as drawing inspiration from The Crow. I think these next two are more compelling in order. So I'm going to go from least to most. The least compelling is the comparison between the makeup stuff. The next is that we have that scene in The Crow where Eric lays out a fire emblem of the crow and lights it on fire. Mm-hmm. And the Batman emblem in fire shows up on the Dark Knight poster. And then the last one is, and there's a lot of YouTube videos where you can go see these side by side. But the scene where Eric is approaching Top Dollar's gathering of mobsters to collect skank, it does look very similar to the scene in which the Joker enters the collected mobsters of Gotham. And confronts them to take leadership. And that's the one that is the strongest parallel to me.
Yeah, I never really thought about it until you brought it up. But yeah, that actually has some weight.
Well, when you see those scenes play out side by side, next time you get a chance, and listener, I recommend that you do the same. Just look for that on YouTube. It's an easy find. It feels pretty compelling once you watch it play out. Like even, The Crow comes in first and how the guys react, and even the confrontation between Top Dollar and Eric. What's the kind of the lead gangster in that the Nolan film? I can't remember his last name. Eric
Gamble. Oh, Eric Roberts.
Eric Roberts' character. His name was Gamble.
Yeah. Okay. No, it wasn't. He was Maroney.
That's right. I should remember that. So the reaction between Top Dollar and Maroney, there's just a lot of parallels. It makes me think that I couldn't find anywhere where Nolan addressed it, but it makes me think Nolan is definitely conversant with The Crow.
Yeah.
Well, anything else you got on this one, man?
No, man. I'm just really glad that we decided to do this, and it was really good to check it out and watch it again. That's one, The Crow's one of those movies that I feel like you should dust it off every year and rewatch it and just appreciate it for what it is. And so I'm glad we had the opportunity to do that. I'm also glad we had the opportunity to go long form on it and excuse me, and talk about it and bring some really cool stuff up about the history.
Yeah, with you entirely. I appreciate you suggesting it. I know that we've kind of went into extra innings here. Do you want to wrap us up and we'll get ready for, I guess, talking about Brightburn next week, right?
Yeah, man, we got Brightburn next week. Anyway, man, let's hit the high notes, right?
Sure.
Scale of 1 to 10. What are you giving this?
Dude, I love this movie and I've watched it a ton. I'm probably going to give it a higher rating than most people. I think this is like a 7.5.
Okay, I'm actually going to go higher than that, give it an 8.
Okay, yeah, well, I feel good. I'm in your neighborhood. I mean, again, not a perfect movie, and in hindsight, maybe it doesn't hold up as well to people who didn't meet it as young adults or children, but man, I love this movie, and there's nothing I can really criticize when I consider it as a product of 1994. I mean, over and against Endgame, sure, but in 94, this thing was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, this was the end-all be-all in 94.
Yep.
Oh. Do we see anything scary?
Man, I don't think so. I don't think I was scared the first time I saw it. Nothing like stands out as a jump scare or anything like that. So I'm going to say no, but not as a criticism.
I'm going to say yes.
Okay. And
I'll tell you why. The heroin scene has stuck with me for 25 years. And as someone who grew up in a drug environment, it just kind of, it sticks with you.
Sure.
And So yeah, I don't think inherently there's anything like jump scary or anything like that. But that is a scene that I'll never forget. More so for the personal implications that it had in my life.
Yeah, I got you. I got you.
So yeah, I'd say yeah, I saw something scary.
Okay. Well, no argument from me. I saw a good
and that
movie,
might
man.
that might actually be the first time that I've said yes and you've said no to that question. So
maybe I'll call you the Crow Uncle.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, Uncle Crow over here trying to fight the good fight. All right, man. Well, hey, guys, thank you so much for listening. You know how to support us. Go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, Plenty of Fish, wherever we're at, and give us those coveted 5-star reviews. Let us know what you're thinking about the show. Of course, we've got the Patreon campaign. Jeff, we got to figure out what we're going to do for Patreon this month.
I've got some nominations I'll discuss with you offline.
Okay, perfect. Patreon.com/Scary Podcast, and you can help us grow this podcast with your contributions to that. Of course, you can join our Facebook group, highly touted and praised. We saw something scary on Facebook. If you're in the Tennessee area, I have a show in the hometown, baby, Sparta, Tennessee, on June the 21st at 7 o'clock at Bilbrey Farms. Yes, you heard that right, Bilbrey Farms. And I'm bringing a couple of funny friends with me, so you can get tickets for that at eventbrite.com. Just search my name. He's at Right Jeff. I'm at Derek Zoo. We're out of time. We're going to keep this comic book trend going next week with Brightburn. But until then, guys, keep your head up. Can't rain all the time. See you guys back here next week. Bye-bye.